On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 196. Despite the stalemate, Hamas's deputy leader states that the hostage negotiations have not collapsed and that Hamas has not closed the door on the negotiations. The IDF announces concluding its operation in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Pictures are emerging of the devastation in a Nuseirat refugee camp. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reports that the death toll in Gaza, including civilians and militants, has crossed 34,000. The United States and the EU impose sanctions on West Bank settlers, individuals, and organizations, including Meir Kahana's grandson and the Israeli Rafah organization. Israel carries out a limited but direct retaliation against Iran. Attacks carried out in Isfahan, Baghdad, and Syria. Both Israel and Iran indicate de-escalation. The state of Palestine's bid to be recognized as a full UN member has failed. Despite having 12 countries vote in favor in the UN Security Council, the United States vetoed the resolution, causing it to fall. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the latest highlights from the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of April 19th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of April 20th, 2024 in the Middle East. Since I have not done a summary for the last several days, this summary is going to include all the recent developments since Tuesday of this week. Starting with the hostage negotiations, on Wednesday, Musa Abu Marzouk, the deputy leader of Hamas's external leadership, stated that while the movement is adamant about its position, the negotiations have not collapsed and Hamas has not abandoned them. Al-Akhbar, which is a newspaper as a Hezbollah affiliate in Lebanon, also reported that Egypt and Qatar are trying to revive the negotiations, however that there is a lot less optimism at this present point in time, and that the King of Bahrain, Hamad bin Isa, has also arrived in Cairo in order to possibly get involved in the negotiations. I remind everyone that where everything stands right now is that Hamas gave its latest answer that essentially rejected the U.S. compromise that Israel had tentatively accepted. Right now, Hamas has put forth its own deal. However, that also includes terms that Israel has already rejected, and the situation is currently completely stalled. Related to this, also on Wednesday, Qatar announced that it is reconsidering its position as negotiator between Israel and Hamas during this war. The Qatari Prime Minister, Mohammed Athani, stated that negotiations are, quote, being used by certain politicians for their own personal interests. He did not specifically mention that he is referring to Prime Minister Netanyahu. However, since the Qatari Prime Minister and other officials in Qatar have in the past specifically stated that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, as far as they're concerned, is using the negotiations in order to stall and buy time, it is likely that he was referring to the Israeli Prime Minister. If Qatar does in fact step back from the negotiations, it is going to mean several things. Mostly it is going to shift the weight towards Egypt and its role. That may actually have a lot of influence in the way negotiations are held, since Egypt has a lot more of a connection to Hamas's internal leadership in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar, as opposed to the external leadership of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, who resides in Qatar, and that is why Qatar mostly negotiates with him. It is also possible that Qatar is trying to fend off some of the international pressure. The United States has been heavily pressuring Qatar to apply sanctions to Hamas if they do not accept a hostage deal. It is possible that Qatar is trying to, on the one hand, get out of the situation where they are not applying enough pressure on Hamas as far as the United States is concerned. On the other hand, not be caught in the middle and actually not be able to, quote-unquote, deliver the goods. And that is why they are trying to step back from the negotiations. Again, right now it was stated that they are considering that. As it stands right now, the hostage negotiations are completely stalled. There is no set date for the sides to continue talking again. As it was reported, both Egypt and Qatar are trying to get the sides back together. However, everything has been stalled in light of the escalation between Israel and Iran in this past week. Remains to be seen where it develops. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, in the last several days there have been several barrages of rockets targeting the southern parts of Israel, fired from the Gaza Strip. Most of these rockets targeted the southern areas surrounding the Gaza Strip. Today there was a barrage targeting the areas of Sderot, and in the last several days there was also barrages towards the city of Ashkelon. The Al-Quds brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad took responsibility for several of these barrages, specifically the one towards Sderot today. Regarding the situation in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, after at the beginning of the week I stated that there was some news about possible IDF operation that's going on in Beit Hanun, that operation did develop throughout the week. On Tuesday, it was reported that after airstrikes were carried out on Monday, the IDF began an operation in Beit Hanun in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. A Palestinian asylum for internally displaced people was seen evacuating the region, and there was a lot of reports of gun battles in the area. On Wednesday, it was reported that Yusuf Rafiq Ahmed Shabath, who is the chief of interrogation in Hamas's Beit Hanun battalions, was assassinated in an airstrike. Shabath was also a known operative in the movement's intelligence units and a very big player within the movement's intelligence activity in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, and he was assassinated as part of this operation in Beit Hanun. In addition, on Friday, there was substantial artillery fire that was reported in the Beit Lahia region, targeting rocket launching sites. It is possible that we're going to see the expansion of the IDF activity in Beit Hanun bleed over to Beit Lahia. As of now, all that has been reported is ground bombings of artillery fire in the areas of Beit Lahia, and the operation in Beit Hanun, as far as we know, is still ongoing. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, after a week-long operation, on Thursday, the IDF announced completing its activities in the outskirts of al-Nuseirat refugee camp. So I remind everyone that a week ago, the IDF announced that it is carrying on an operation in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. I estimated this is around al-Nuseirat refugee camp, but the IDF did not explicitly state that that was going to be its area. The IDF reported that during its operation, the forces expanded the security buffer zone around the Netzarim corridor, as well as locating and destroying 17 tunnel entrances, an underground headquarters of Hamas, rocket manufacturing compounds, as well as other terror infrastructure. So the Netzarim corridor is this corridor that the IDF is maintaining from east to west that essentially divides the Gaza Strip between what the IDF considers the northern parts of the Strip and the rest of the Strip. The IDF has been maintaining outposts and checkpoints along this corridor, and according to at least reports, this operation was meant to expand the buffer zone around this corridor. After the IDF withdrawal, substantial devastation pictures began emerging from al-Nuseirat refugee camp after a week-long operation of the IDF. In addition, today, on Friday, there were ongoing battles that were reported, likely around the Netzarim corridor, however it was not reported specifically where. And I will say that despite not having summaries the last several days, there's been very little news coming out of the southern part of the Gaza Strip. In Han Yunis and Rafah, there have been very little reports, occasional bombings that occurred, but no IDF activity. Last that was reported, the areas around Han Yunis, a lot of internally displaced Palestinians are beginning to return to that area. Presumably that is continuing. We will learn more in the coming days. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, and specifically to the impeding IDF invasion of Rafah. On Tuesday, it was reported that in preparation of the Rafah invasion, Israel has negotiated with the United Arab Emirates the establishment of 5 quote-unquote humanitarian bubbles within the Gaza Strip that will either be established by the United Arab Emirates or possibly even be staffed with officials from the United Arab Emirates. These are to be huge compound areas that will grant both shelter and medical facilities to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. This matches the reports that came out about a month ago, stating that part of the IDF's plan to evacuate the over 1 million civilians within Rafah is to create humanitarian islands within the Gaza Strip where there will be established already existing shelters and food supplies and medical supplies. According to this report, the negotiations are ongoing with the UAE about establishing these. I will add, though, that the UAE officially announced that it is stopping its humanitarian maritime corridor to the Gaza Strip after the strike against the World Central Kitchen workers back on April 1st. So it remains to be seen if this negotiation with the UAE right now is something new, or if it is something reported from the past, and is the UAE still continuing it or not, remains to be seen. In addition to this, on Wednesday, Al-Arabi al-Jadid quoted the Egyptian sources stating that the U.S. administration has accepted an IDF operation in Rafah in exchange for Israel not carrying out a wider retaliation against Iran in this ongoing escalation between Israel and Iran. The report added that Egypt is preparing its forces and the humanitarian aid capabilities that it has in the northern Sinai for a possible Israeli invasion of Rafah. I will say this matches other reports that also came out on Wednesday suggesting that the United States is starting to negotiate with Israel to accept a Rafah invasion in exchange for other reports didn't say specifically a smaller retaliation of Israel against Iran, but it said in exchange for Israel adhering to U.S. requests with regards to the region. On Thursday, there was another meeting that was held between Israel and the U.S. officials discussing the possible implications and development of a Rafah invasion. The White House reported, quote, both sides agree that the goal was to defeat Hamas in Rafah, but this also lends some credence to the notion that perhaps the United States is looking more favorably, or at least accepting, an IDF invasion of Rafah in exchange for a more minimal retaliation of Israel against Iran. This is a very different tone than the United States took in the past with regards to a Rafah invasion. In the past, the U.S. said that a Rafah invasion would simply be wrong, unnecessary, and impractical. Now, saying that both sides agree that the goal is to defeat Hamas and Rafah already is a very, very different tone of the U.S. administration, which may be lending some credence to the report in Al-Arabi al-Jadid that in fact the U.S. administration has worked out a deal with Israel in regards to Rafah. I will say also, though, that on Friday, today, despite this change in rhetoric, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken again stated that the U.S. believes that Israel's goals can be achieved without a major invasion of Rafah. What we are likely seeing is that there have been negotiations between Israel and the United States with regards to a Rafah invasion, and these are likely tied to the retaliation that Israel carried out against Iran. It is possible that the United States has shifted its perceptions from trying to stop an IDF invasion of Rafah to trying to have some influence on it and see how it develops. Right now, all signs point to the fact that the invasion is going to be carried out. Initially, about a month ago, it was reported that Israel had signaled the month of May as possibly the month in which the invasion will be carried out. Remains to be seen. Either way, before the invasion is carried out, Israel has stated that it is going to evacuate the civilians from Rafah. That is a process that, according to most estimates, is going to take between 2 to 3 weeks, so it is not going to occur overnight. We will see as things develop. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last several days, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 260. 11 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip since my last report on Monday, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,582. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 215 Palestinians were killed since my last report on Monday, bringing the total number of Palestinians that have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 34,012. 76,833 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and I remind everyone that there are still several thousand Palestinians that are buried under the rubbles and are very likely presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Throughout the week, there has been a continuous increase in the amount of humanitarian aid trucks that have been entering the Gaza Strip. This still comes amidst the pressure that the U.S. mounted on Israel to open up new corridors and to remove restrictions on aid trucks coming into the Gaza Strip. On Tuesday, it was reported that 378 aid trucks, that is a record since the war began, entered the Gaza Strip in those 24 hours, and then 98 aid packages were also paradropped from the sky. On Friday, today, it was reported that 276 aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip, and paradropping missions also continued in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, as well as possibly in other parts as well. In addition to this, on Thursday, the Israeli cabinet decided on a series of different mechanisms in order to increase the entrance of humanitarian aid and make the mechanism flow better into the Gaza Strip. Among others, these included expanding the Kerem Shalom crossing in the southern parts of the strip, setting up other inspection areas also for aid trucks and to facilitate the inspection of aid before it enters the strip, purchasing new logistical equipment, and expanding the roads in the area. This may also be associated with the different protests in Israel that have blocked the roads coming into the checkpoints and into the Gaza Strip in the last several months. During the meeting of the Israeli cabinet, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant stated that Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich is refusing to transfer the necessary funds for expanding these humanitarian activities into the Gaza Strip. He called upon Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to intervene. It was not reported when Netanyahu responded or if this was in fact done. Moving on to the West Bank, there have been several reports throughout the week about activity in the West Bank. On Tuesday, it was reported that the IDF launched a division-wide operation along the West Bank's border with Israel, carrying out many raids in the different villages in the region. According to reports, at least 23 Palestinians were arrested in the first 24 hours of these raids. IDF activity was reported, among others, in the areas of Jenin, Hebron, Kalkilia. Later in the day, Al Jazeera also reported a major IDF operation that was developing in the Nur Shams refugee camp near Tulkarem. It was reported that in the invasion of Nur Shams refugee camp, IDF engineering units were also seen involving bulldozers and other engineering equipment. This again was reported by Al Jazeera, quoting Palestinian sources on the ground. Today, on April 19th, it was reported that hundreds of IDF soldiers are raiding the different areas around Nur al-Shams. This includes many different engineering units as well as different IDF units and divisions. During the activity, it was reported that Muhammad Jaber, who is the battalion commander from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad of the Tulkarm region, was killed in a gun battle. Along with him, 5 more operatives of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad were reportedly killed, and 4 IDF soldiers were reportedly injured in this operation in the last 24 hours. In addition to this, political news from the last 24 hours, both the United States and the EU announced that they are imposing new sanctions against Israeli settlers, individuals, and organizations that are involved in West Bank violence and violence against Palestinians. The U.S. imposed sanctions on 2 organizations, the Mount Hebron Fund and the Shalom Asirayich organization. Reportedly, both of these are involved in raising funds for settlers who are involved in violent activity against Palestinians, specifically those settlers that have been previously sanctioned by the United States. In addition, the U.S. also declared personal sanctions against Benzi Gopstein. He is the founder of Israel's Lehava movement, and the EU declared sanctions against the Lehava movement itself. I will say that Lehava is a movement that champions Jewish racial purity within Israel, specifically targeting Arab men who are seen dating Jewish women. They have often been involved in violent activity also within Israel itself as well as in the West Bank. Now both Gopstein in the United States and Lehava itself in the EU are on sanction lists. In addition, the EU also declared sanctions against 4 more settlers on charges of violent activity against Palestinians. These include Elisha Yered and Meir Ettinger. Ettinger, I will add, is the grandson of Meir Kahana, the founder of the terrorist group, the Jewish Defense League. He's also the leader of the rebellion movement. This is a movement that tried to launch its own internal rebellion within the West Bank against the Israeli authorities back in 2014. Since then, he is a known activist and a big instigator of violence in the West Bank. He is now on the sanction list of the EU as well. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel and southern parts of Lebanon, throughout the last several days there have been substantial barrages of rockets and missiles that were fired from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel. On Tuesday, Hezbollah claimed responsibility in addition to these rockets for 11 border incidents that usually involves shooting attacks that occur into IDF outposts. Hezbollah also sent rockets targeting the IDF Air Force bases in Mount Meron in the last several days. In addition, today, rockets were also fired towards the areas of the Yiftach region, and an anti-tank missile hit an IDF vehicle in the areas near Metula. No injuries were reported in those various barrages or in that anti-tank missile hit of an IDF vehicle. Regarding IDF activity in the last several days, in addition to targeting Hezbollah structures and infrastructure in southern Lebanon, on Tuesday, April 16th, there were several noted assassinations that the IDF carried out both in southern Lebanon and other areas throughout the country. Among these, Muhammad Hassin Mustafa Sahori was assassinated. He is reportedly the commander of rocket and missile firing in Hezbollah's Western Radwan division. That makes him a very senior official. The Western Division is a division that is in charge of a lot of the rocket fire that has been targeting Israel since the war began. Reportedly, he was a commander of all of that rocket and missile firing, and he was assassinated. In addition to him, Muhammad Ibrahim Fadlallah, who is also a senior activist in Hezbollah's rocket and missile units, was assassinated along with Sahori in that same attack. In addition to these, an even more high-profile assassination was carried out in the areas of Tzor. Ismail Yusuf Baz was killed when missiles struck his car in the region. Baz was one of the more senior figures in Hezbollah's ranks. His position or his rank was tantamount to a division commander in the Israeli military. He was known as a commander of the entire coastal region of Hezbollah, and his death is quite a blow to the organization as well. In addition to these assassinations, in the last 24 hours, the IDF has carried out several attacks targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and military structures in the southern parts of Lebanon. These include attacks in the areas of Al-Mansuri, Itaron, as well as Ita Sha'ab. In the last several days, Hezbollah stated that several of its operatives have been killed in different IDF attacks. Hezbollah now states that the total number of operatives that have been killed since the war began is 282. Moving on to some of the regional developments, in the last 24 hours, on Thursday night, Israel carried out its retaliation against Iran. For Iran's retaliation against Israel that was carried out on Saturday night, that was a retaliation to Israel carrying out an attack against the Iranian consulate in Damascus on April 1st. Israel's retaliation against Iran was relatively limited compared to Iran's attack on Israel. It involved missile strikes in the areas of Isfahan in Iran itself, as well as attacks against Iranian interests and pro-Iranian militias, both in the areas of Baghdad in Iraq, as well as in Syria. According to reports, the attack that was carried out in Isfahan was a series of missiles that were launched by drones. I will say that it's important to note that the attack in Isfahan is very symbolic. Isfahan is known as a very important region. It houses a lot of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's bases and its general activity, as well as some of Iran's main nuclear facilities and airstrips. The missiles were reportedly fired by drones, and different reports throughout the day suggested that it is possible the drones were not launched from Israel or even from a neighboring country, but possibly they were operated by Israeli agents within Iran itself. New York Times quoted Iranian officials stating that no drones were seen invading Iranian airspace. This was later confirmed by Iran's state TV that also suggested that it is possible that internal agents within Iran had operated these drones. Different sources, including the Saudi Al-Hadith, also reported that as part of the attack in Isfahan, missiles were fired at different radar systems that were part of the air defenses of the nuclear facilities in Natanz. Reportedly, the airbase that was hit was also involved in launching the drones that Iran used to attack Israel last week. It is also important to note that several different other reports stated that it is possible that other attacks were carried out, targeting different radar systems and air defenses in Iran. However, a lot of these reports were unconfirmed. There were more reports of locals on the ground who saw or heard explosions that were going off in different regions and speculated what they were about. This is the only report that has been confirmed by several different news outlets. In addition, there were reports that more drones were also intercepted in the areas of Tabriz in Iran as well. And as I stated, there was also attacks that were carried out in Baghdad against pro-Iranian militias, and there were also explosions that were heard in Syria simultaneously. Later in the day, the Syrian military did report that its air defenses were attacked in the southern parts of the country. However, it was not reported specifically what damage was done or which bases were attacked. On Friday today, the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post both quoted senior Israeli officials stating that the attacks in Isfahan specifically were meant as a message that will be sent towards Iran, showing the Iranian regime that Israel can attack anywhere at once in Iran, including its nuclear facilities. CNN also quoted regional intelligence officials stating the attacks between Israel and Iran appear to be over. It is important to note that Israel did not actually claim responsibility for the attack that was carried out in Iran. It is pretty clear that Israel is the one who carried out that attack, and again, the New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters, Wall Street Journal have all quoted Israeli officials talking about it, but the fact that Israel did not claim open responsibility for it, and also in Iran, they have said that the attack was carried out, but have not explicitly blamed Israel, are both indications that it is very possible that in fact both sides are looking to scale down their level of attacks, Israel not boasting about the fact that it carried out an attack in Iran, and Iran not claiming that Israel carried out the attack and therefore needs to retaliate, are all signs that this current round between the sides may be coming to a close. In addition to this, in the last 24 hours, a major explosion was reported in a base belonging to the Al-Hashad Al-Sha'abi, or translated, the Popular Mobilization Forces. This is an umbrella organization that operates in Iraq, uniting several different militias that are part of Iran's militias in the region under one umbrella. The attack reportedly occurred south of Baghdad. AFP reported that one person was killed and 8 people were wounded, and El Miadin stated that 3 different waves of attacks were carried out against this base of Al-Hashad Al-Sha'abi, targeting the leadership's headquarters. It has not been reported who that person who was killed was. Was it the leader of the group or not? We'll likely find out more about that in the coming days. Some political news from the last several days: the Biden administration is reportedly reviewing a new arms sale to Israel that will be carried out, if it is approved, in the next several months. This is in addition to the current package that is being debated in Congress, and reportedly includes tank ammunitions, armored vehicles, and mortars, and is estimated at over $1 billion US. In addition, there are continued protests that are going on in Israel by family members of hostages calling on the government to carry out a hostage deal. I mentioned that because it may be important as pressure mounts. It may lead to some fractures within Israel's government. However, right now, as I stated, the hostage negotiation is completely stalled, so it remains to be seen if this will actually have any effect. And another political report: Australia issued a travel warning to its citizens in Israel in the last 24 hours, calling upon them to leave the country. Moving on to some news related to the future of the Gaza Strip. On Tuesday, Israel's minister Benny Gantz, who's a member of Israel's war cabinet and according to polls, if elections were to happen today, would be Israel's prime minister, stated that civilian matters in the Gaza Strip in the future should be managed by Palestinian elements that are not part of Hamas, alongside an international agency and moderate regional Arab countries. In this, he is implying that he is in favor of some sort of model in the Gaza Strip that will be, on the one hand, relying on local leadership, on the other hand, also involve local Arab countries, which is different than some of the models that have been proposed by Prime Minister Netanyahu regarding what will happen in the future of the Gaza Strip. It is also vastly different than the proposals that are being championed by different hawkish elements within Israel, like Bezalel Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are calling for the reestablishment of Israeli settlements within the Gaza Strip. And in relation to this, other news that pertain to the future of the Gaza Strip and the possibility of a Palestinian state or some sort of other entity in the future. On Thursday, the Palestinian request to receive full member status as a state within the United Nations was vetoed by the United States. The request was voted upon in the UN Security Council. 12 states voted in favor of the state of Palestine being recognized as a full member of the United Nations. In addition to these, the United Kingdom and Sweden abstained, so the Palestinian request received 12 in favor and 2 abstaining. However, the U.S. was the only one who voted against, but given the veto power that the United States has in the UN Security Council, the resolution was blocked. This came under a lot of condemnation by different actors, both within the Palestinian leadership as well as in the world, of the United States blocking this resolution. The United States has long since said that it supports the establishment of a Palestinian state. However, it has also always said that this has to happen only in direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. That is still its current position as things stand right now. So just to summarize, possibly the biggest news from the last several days is Israel's retaliation against Iran. This comes after Iran's first time ever attack against Israel directly. Right now it seems that both sides are scaling down the tensions between them. And in addition to this, and possibly related to Israel's limited retaliation to Iran, there are mounting reports that Israel may be planning its invasion of Rafah to be carried out in the next couple of weeks. Remains to be seen. I remind everyone also that it's the Jewish holiday of Passover that is starting next week. That is a week-long holiday. This is likely to stall some of Israel's plans with regards to the invasion. However, again, remains to be seen how things develop. I will also add that in light of the upcoming holiday next week, I will be traveling. I will try to put out reports every other day or so, but they're going to be a bit more sporadic. If there are any major updates, I will put out special shorter reports just to cover them. If you find these reports interesting, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.